This Let's Edit with Media Composer tutorial is brought to you by VideoGuys.com, the leading reseller of video editing and production equipment for more than 25 years. And by Boris Effects, a leading developer of visual effect plugins, titling, video editing, and workflow tools for broadcast, post-production, and film professionals. Hey everyone, Kevin P McAuliffe here, and I am back again with another Let's Edit with Avid Media Composer tutorial. And in this lesson, I want to talk about understanding native formats. In our last lesson, we got a little bit of an introduction and primer to the source browser. In this lesson, we're going to take that concept one step further by talking about getting footage into Media Composer properly. Now, you might think, well, Kev, I've been bringing stuff in, importing or transcoding footage forever. Transcoding is the way to go. Well, believe it or not, transcoding should only be used in very certain situations. And in this lesson, I'm going to show you why consolidating is more than meets the eye and why you're definitely going to want to use it when working with Avid native media formats. Now, as I'm going to remind you at the start of each lesson, I want to talk about my footage partner, ArtGrid, artgrid.io. They have some absolutely fantastic stock footage that you can subscribe to pretty much fill any stock footage need you might have. And what I'm going to do in each lesson is feature some different footage that you may not even be aware that they have. But let me tell you something, you can download all of this footage plus thousands and thousands of other clips at artgrid.io. And the very cool thing is not only do they offer HD and higher 4K footage, but they also have log and raw footage as well that you can download and work with based on the subscription model that you subscribe to. All right, so let's take a look at the clips that we are going to be working with in this lesson. Now, this is a 6K ProRes clip, again, coming to us courtesy of ArtGrid, and the other clip we're going to be working with is a 4K animation clip that you can see right here. Now, what's important to keep in mind about these two clips, let me just call it media info here. This one is 6144 by 2592 at 23976 frames per second. The other clip that we'll be working with, I actually took and converted to 60 frames per second. You'll see why in just a little bit. Now, the last clip that I have is basically an H.264 of the first clip. Now, I did that on purpose. So what we're going to be working with in this lesson is two clips that are in a what's called an Avid-friendly codec, and one clip that is not in an Avid-friendly codec, and how we are going to deal with this. All right, so let's just quit out of media info. What I'm going to do is just launch my browser because I'm going to introduce you to one of my best friends. And one of my best friends is this document right here. Now, I'm going to put a link to it in the show notes below so you don't have to go searching for it or attempt to read what the URL is at the top of the browser. This is the Avid supported video file formats document dated June the 18th of 2019. And now I'm just going to scroll down a little bit. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to scroll right down to here, and I'm going to show you that this is going to show us the file format supported for linking via AMA. Now, this is using the built-in AMA or third-party AMA plugins like Red. Now, keep in mind, certain AMA plugins you have to download and install before you work with them. And I'll put a link to that in the show notes as well. Now, you'll notice, because we're talking specifically about Media Composer, it's right here. You'll notice there's the link to file option. And what I always like to do is I like to come down to about here. Perfect. All right. Now, you'll see that with the Red Codecs, we have the ability to link to clips that are in 2K, 3K, 4, 5, 4, 4.5, 6, 8K. We can link to all of those. Now, what's important to keep in mind about the Red Codec is that it is not an Avid-friendly codec. Just because you can link to something doesn't mean that it's Avid-friendly. All right. Now, let's just come right back up here for a second and talk about the legend. Now, we were talking about blue. The Red codec was a blue non-native format. Media formats whose codec is not natively supported by the editing system. These formats require transcoding during acquisition before they can be stored in the Avid Media Files folder. Now, as you've heard me say before, I forbid you from editing with linked media. I just forbid it. Nobody should ever do that because all it's going to do is cause you headaches in the end. So please heed that piece of advice. Okay? Let's come back down here though. And the one that I'm looking for is Quicktime, because Quicktime is sort of the most common file that people are trying to bring into Media Composer. Now, what's important to keep in mind is that just because your clip is a QuickTime clip doesn't mean that it's Apple friendly. Remember, QuickTime is only the container. The codec is what's important. Now, the most common one that you're going to see, and chances are in your work when dealing with QuickTime files, is ProRes. The other one will be H.264, which is what I'm working with right now. I'm actually working with both ProRes and H.264. And what this is going to let us do is it's going to let us work in an Avid friendly way. Now, what does that mean? Well, you'll see that purple here is the media formats whose codec is natively supported. No additional processing of the media is required during acquisition into the Avid editing application. The media is simply rewrapped. That is important. Rewrapping is no additional compression passes added. Transcoding is an additional compression pass. Okay? During import, these formats will come in much more quickly, i.e. fast import that Media Composer editors have grown to love, and can also be consolidated, transcoded, or rendered in their native format. Now, consolidated is the big one. And a lot of people don't quite understand consolidating. What's important to keep in mind with consolidating is that what most Media Composer editors associate consolidating with is gathering media. And what I mean by that is, let's say you're editing a project and you have media scattered all over 10 different hard drives. You want to take this sequence when you're done with it, and you want to copy all the media associated with it onto another drive. That term is also referred to as consolidating, however it's slightly different. In that case, you're consolidating a sequence and you're bringing in the sum of its parts together. What we're talking about today is consolidating with single individual clips, which is going to be a rewrapping process. So I've picked the two codecs, the two most easiest ones to work with as an example in this lesson, which is the ProRes codec and H.264, because chances are if you're working with QuickTime, those two you're going to run into all the time. All right, so let's Command or Alt and Tab into Avid Media Composer. And the first thing that I do want to point out here, as I'm just going to come to my project settings, is that we're working in a 1080p 23976 project. Now, I saw a post on the Avid editors of Facebook about a week ago where there was an editor who was bringing in different raster dimensions, different frame rates, and what they were doing was they were going in and creating all these different projects to bring in this media correctly. Now, the problem with doing that is that all the media will then be tagged to all those different projects as opposed to being tagged to the project that we're currently working in. Don't think you can't bring in, whether it's by transcoding or consolidating, frame rates that don't match the current project you're working on, because you can. But let's talk about the two examples so you can see how this is going to work. Now, I know that for the most part, all of these QuickTime files that I'm going to be bringing in, the codec is supported. Now, it actually needs a second to refresh here. Let's just go back to the desktop here. Where's my desktop? There we go. It's not updating here, but that's fine. So you'll see that the Universal Media Engine link for the plugin is selected. It's actually the same for both of these. I'm not sure why it's not updating. Important to note, though, right here, codec. We got three different ones. ProRes 444, AVC Longop High 1080p, which is H.264, and Apple ProRes 422HQ. The other thing that I want to point out is the frame rates, 60, 2398, and 2398. Let's select them all and say link. Perfect. They all linked in with no issues. Now, if for some reason you have a clip that won't link in, what you can always do is check the document to see if that's even supported. And if it's not, you can use another application like Media Encoder to flip the file over to a Media Composer happy codec like ProRes or another one before you link to it and bring it in. All right. Now, I've also created a bin view here with the columns that are going to give us a little bit more information here about these clips. Now, this is pretty much what we saw inside of the source browser. Now, what's also important to keep in mind about the source browser is I've jokingly said that I forbid you as an editor to use the file input import media window anywhere, because you just don't need to, because you actually have access to all of that information right here. You can actually import right from the source browser and even get access to your import settings as well. So it's one of those things where, because you're going to be doing most of your media, I'm not even going to say importing, you're linking to and you're importing and all that type of work inside this window, just stick with the window so you get comfortable working with it. So let's switch back to link. We've already brought those clips in. I'm just going to close the source browser. Now, how people are accustomed to working is like this. Okay. They're going to say, okay, well, I see this clip here is 6144 by 2592. So what I have to do when I transcode this is I have to find a project setting that's going to be close to that. So that's going to be 6K. So well, I don't really have a 6K, but maybe an 8K. Maybe I got to create a preset. And they're going to start to go crazy trying to figure out a raster dimension that they can work with. Or they'll create another project and attempt to work that way. Or what they'll do is just this. They'll right click. They'll come down to Consolidate Transcode. They'll select Transcode. They'll say, okay, I'm going to switch this to a DNX HD clip. And actually, I think what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go with a, do we have DNX HR in here? DNX HD. We actually don't even have access to it. I actually have access to Apple ProRes in here, but let's just stick with DNX HD. Now, the reason I actually have access to DNX HD is because we are working with an HD project. So if I was to select standard quality, I believe that would be DNX HD 115 before the big switchover. What would now happen is I would have to choose whether I want to convert the frame rate or to keep it. Now, I'm already working with a 2398 clip anyways, so we could say converted. It's not really converting anything. And I'm simply going to say transcode. Now, the first thing you're going to notice is that it tells me that it's going to take about 30 to 40 seconds to transcode this clip, which for the purposes of me showing this to you is fine. However, a few things are going to happen here once the transcode is done. The first thing that's going to happen is you're going to notice that its codec is going to change because we're basically recompressing this file right now. Once this is done, we'll give it another second here. Let's watch what happens. So we can even compare, which is what I like here, what's going on. You'll notice the first thing that's happened, frame rate stayed the same, which is fine, but our codec has changed from Apple ProRes to DNX HD standard quality. However, that is an HD codec. So what it's also done, Media Composer, is it's taken this clip and it's compressed, it's shrunk it down to fit in a 1920 by 1080 frame, which is not what we want because maybe we want to get in and zoom in on part of this image, using frame flex. So we've actually done a few things wrong here. We've recompressed the file, we've shrunk it down and flattened it so that we can't really make any stylistic changes to the frame. We've also actually taken too long to do this. Imagine if we had to do this to like 500 clips, okay? And it was going to take, 3 times as long as it should for each clip. So let me show you the proper way to do this. I'm just going to delete this here. Now keep in mind, if I was working with this clip for an offline purpose, I might go this method to save space. Let me just delete this. For example, if I was going to go to DNX HD 36, I might actually use that method. But because in most cases we're sort of working on quick projects to do as an online, what I would do in this case is I would actually come down to Consolidate Transcode and I would choose Consolidate. Now you're going to notice that with Transcode we have a bunch of options. What do we want the raster dimension to be, the frame rate, the resolution, all this type of jazz, okay? Now, once I select Consolidate, I actually don't have any options. I can delete the original media files when done. What that means is the linked to clip that's in my bin. That's really it. Once I say consolidate and I say go, the first thing you're going to notice is it's only going to take about 12 seconds to consolidate this clip, as opposed to the 30 to 40 seconds it was going to take to consolidate or to transcode the other one. The next thing you're going to notice right away is that frame rate's the same, the codec is the same, the raster dimension is the same. Nothing has changed. All that's happened is this clip has been rewrapped in this project. Take a look at what's going to happen with this 60 frame per second clip. Keep in mind, if I was to transcode it and I wanted to keep the frame rate, I would have to transcode it as a different codec. However, if I come back to Consolidate Transcode, I just leave everything the way it is and I say go. Again, this is going to be a super fast process here. You'll see the clips, I think, probably about the same length, maybe a little bit longer. So it's going to take slightly longer for it to get in and actually consolidate it. But when it's done, I'm actually going to have access to the 60 frames per second as a rewrapped Apple ProRes 422HQ clip at that higher resolution for me to work with in a timeline. Now keep in mind, I'm in a 23976 frame per second project. This is a 60 frame per second clip, and you'll notice that it's dropped on a temporal and a spatial adapter. Spatial for obviously the framing, temporal for the time change that's being made but you'll see I didn't have to create any additional projects. I didn't have to, transcode that media or do anything to that media in that other project before I brought it in here. I can work with whatever size clip I want to work with in this project, and assuming it's Avid friendly, I can simply consolidate it instead of transcoding it to work with it in its native format. Now, also keep in mind that with any one of these clips, you could come into the source settings and you could come in, you could work with frame flex here. Let's just set it to the projects aspect. I could say OK. Now keep in mind, you'll notice that it updated on the preview side and not on the source side, or pardon me, on the source side and not the sequence side. But if we navigate it up here, it's actually not under timeline, it's under clip. And we came down to refresh sequence, and I simply selected all. You'll see that, boom, it immediately updates the sequence to reflect that frame flex adjustment that I made. Super quick and super easy. So that does beg the question, what's going to happen with a non-Avid friendly codec? Well, let's simply choose this. I'm going to right click, come down to Consolidate Transcode, and let's say Consolidate. Media Composer right away. Sorry, not going to work. It says see the console. I don't know why it does that, because in the very next window it actually tells you what the problem is. It basically says these contain foreign compression types which could not be consolidated. You should transcode them. So basically, Media Composer tells you when you are attempting to consolidate a non-Avid friendly codec, so you can get in and transcode it instead. Now, I hope you understand from this lesson how essential consolidating can be to your workflow. All right? It's going to bring in the footage. It's going to bring it in at its native raster dimension, at its native codec. No recompression happening, just a rewrap. And if you're going to be working with non-native media, remember, you can get in and work with any frame rate, frame size, whatever in a project. What you have to remember is that when you're going into transcode, you're going to need to get in, make sure you set to keep your frame rate the way that it is. And in that situation, if you had to get in and do a transcode, you could adjust the project's raster dimension. So this way, it's actually going to match or be as close as it could possibly be, so you can get the most out of your footage. But you know what? I'll talk about that in an upcoming lesson. All right, now as we're wrapping up, I want to remind you to check out our sponsors, Video Guys, for all of your Avid software and hardware, as well as thousands of other products that you can check out over at videoguys.com. And I also want to give a big shout out to the team at Boris Effects, makers of Continuum, Sapphire, and Mocha. And don't forget to use that coupon code of MC101 to get 10% off your next Continuum purchase. If you like this tutorial, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. And don't forget, if you have any questions, you have any comments, or you have any tutorial requests, don't hesitate to send them to me at kevinpmcauliffe@gmail.com. This has been Kevin P. McAuliffe. Thanks a lot for watching.